Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry. Mike and Mike, I've got a treat for us this week. We
Awesome.
we have our first listener question.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
see if it's somebody we know.
So Jeremy wrote in and said he listened to the show on proposals, and that made him, I guess this is more of a topic request than a listener question, but he wanted to get your insight on negotiation.
It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart.
I'm just wondering though, because if you listen to the proposal, for those of you that have listened to it, or maybe if you haven't yet, one of the main themes in that session was talking about our marriage proposals and how they went right or wrong. And so I wonder what he's negotiating now. Is he negotiating a deal, or is he negotiating his way into a prenup, or I don't know anyhow, I think we could talk about negotiation. In fact, I think it's really good timing now that we're at month end and people are pretty excited about negotiating deals at month end. So I think we could definitely talk about that.
I kind of feel like you're directing that towards me. Like if I was better at negotiation, I wouldn't have had to push my future wife off that cliff.
Well, I just think you did a very good job by setting the bar low.
Which is a negotiation strategy.
It is a negotiation strategy.
And in fact, fresh off of this morning, so it's funny, we ended up negotiating a contract with a partner company that is, we're going to be subscribing to a new product or service. And it was, I think we agreed we were going to roll forward. We try to be a good customer because we believe in good sales karma, and we always want to help people where we can, but be a good buyer, if you will. Today, we had the opportunity to save ourselves a lot of money because one of the opening comments from the salesperson was, well, it would be really great if we could get this deal wrapped up today. It's the end of the month. We're heading into the Thanksgiving break. Sure would be great if we could get something done today. And I have a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to get my manager to approve all kinds of special things. And Mike and I are looking at each other like, wow, he is just really helping us negotiate this. Let's go. That's something people should think about with negotiating. I
think there are a couple of things that come to mind for me with this. It's, that in order to negotiate, there have to be multiple parties. And we had a guy that both Mike and I worked for who used to say this often, let's not negotiate with ourselves. And many times that ends up being a function of the sales rep is they start negotiating with the organization. They negotiate inside our organization about the deal that they need to get done without necessarily having all of the information that they need from the customer side. So when you go into a negotiation, realize there are two parties. There are things they want, there are things that they expect, and there are things that they're going to put a higher value on than you might put a value on. That takes me into this concept of trading. Like right now, Mike and I are trading our time. There are other things that we could be doing other than recording a podcast right now. We enjoy the conversations that we have with Jody, so we sit down here. So there's high value on this time period, and we're excited about sharing information. But anytime that you're working with someone, keep in mind they are trading. They're trading their time with you. You're trading your time.
And understanding that you are both trading value. I agree with what you're saying in that we don't understand what the customer puts value on or necessarily what's important to them. And that's what you find out when you are negotiating is it does becoming a trade. One of the things that you see happen in one negotiation approach is you quote a price that's a little bit higher than you'd be willing to accept, knowing that when it came down to the negotiation, you would sort of have one page in your playbook, which is throw a discount at them and say, oh gosh, you really drove a hard deal and you end up charging them 20% less, but you had that factored into your pricing all along. I see a lot of people try that where they say, well, we'll just throw a discount at them and that'll get it over the hump. The problem with that is as a buyer, I look at that and I say, well, if I would have agreed to that price that was 20% higher, now my impression of you is that you built that into the negotiation. And if I had said yes, you wouldn't have said, oh, you know what? I was just kidding. It's actually 20% lower. They would have gone back to their boss and said, oh, I just got them for an extra 20%. It is about having a meaningful conversation to figure out what's important to the other party. And ultimately in negotiation, what you're trying to do is find the happy medium where all parties are happy, where you're receiving the value. In other words, it's not one-sided. There wasn't a winner or a loser, but that each party from their respective viewpoint has felt like they've negotiated a very fair deal. And that's really what we're trying to do. And so in cases where we're asked to give things up or we're asked to make changes, what's the consideration for that? And it's really getting down to, if I have to lower a price to meet a budget objective or whatever the case might be, what is it that they're willing to give up to compensate me for that? Because we work from the starting point of, we're always going to give you in our proposal what we think is the best value. And from there, it's just a process of really trading back and forth.
Yeah, and it's really important to take that value. When you do this, you take that value-based approach as opposed to a price-sensitive approach. I can tell you this: I don't think I will ever go into, or I will never buy something from the Timbuktu website and pay full price. I just know that if I wait long enough, I'm going to get a 40% discount or a 30% discount. So my behavior, I've been conditioned to expect to get that discount email or not buy until I've received that discount email. And Mike and I joke about Kohl's. We don't want to be Kohl's. We don't want to be Macy's. We don't want to be, although actually with the amount of revenue that they generate, it'd be nice to be Kohl's or Macy's. But from that perspective, it's I know that there's going to be a coupon. I know there's something else that's going to come through here. I know there's some discount. I can wait for Cyber Monday or Black Friday to make this purchase. When you take a value-based approach, it's important for you to understand what's everything that's important to the customer. The customer might put a higher value on the time to implement. The customer might put a higher value on the quality of your product. The customer might put a higher value on the speed at which a transaction is going to take place. And the only way that you can get that information is by having a conversation with the customer, asking questions, taking notes, gathering information, not responding every time you get a piece of information. Take some time, synthesize that data, figure out what's the meaning, how does that add to the overall story that you're trying to tell, and then come back with a response.
Yeah, I think I read and I wish I could cite the source of it. And I think it was in my LinkedIn feed. I saw basically it was an internal memo that Elon Musk wrote to his employees about discounting Teslas. And apparently, if you were a celebrity or if you knew somebody in Tesla, apparently it must have been a problem because he was not happy about it. The fact that anybody, and he didn't care who it was getting any kind of discount, because then from his perspective, that meant that somebody was more important than another customer that had established trust with them and paid the price for the car. And it was a pretty scathing email. And it was basically saying, look, we don't discount. We have a price. We have a fair price that we sell our product to the market with. And you do not, I don't care who it is, you do not discount. Because I don't want to have to explain to my friends, other celebrities, other important customers, down to every last customer. I don't want to ever have to be in a position where I have to explain why they weren't important enough to get. But the message was, we have a price. It's a fair price, and that's what people pay.
Well, and there are a couple of examples where you run into that. I mean, how often do you get a discount on buying an iPad? I mean, and nowadays it seems Apple's not moving iPads as quickly as possible as they have in the past. So you see those discounts coming out around Black Friday, but you pay full price for an iPhone unless it's subsidized. I put AEV stuff on my Jeep. You pay a premium for that, but I feel very comfortable paying that premium because I have this perception around the quality that I'm getting by making that decision. So when you're going into this discussion with your customer, I think you've got to realize, are you the low cost leader that's delivering something and you're focused on volume? Is this a transactional deal where it's really about moving things forward quickly? Or is this product that you're delivering into the marketplace something that delivers a significant amount of value, and you have to be able to justify the price based on the impact that it's going to have inside the organization?
Mike, one of the things that comes to mind when you give Tesla, you give iPad, iPhones as an example. These are examples where the price is what it is and you stand firm. But I imagine someone can hear that and say, well, that's not negotiation. That's just standing on your price. Is standing firm on your price negotiation?
I think it is. I think that in that scenario, what you're doing is you're still negotiating with the customer to get them to the point where they see the value that you feel you're delivering within your product that gets them to a point where they are comfortable separating their money from themselves to purchase that thing. So you're still negotiating because you've got to get to the point where you're actually able to close that deal or win that business. Now, there might be things that you can incorporate. So I've never really been in that B2C market, that individual consumer market, but some of the things that from the standpoint of a seller, but from a buyer perspective, there are times where maybe I'm buying that iPad and I get a 20% discount on the cover that I'm going to purchase with it, or I get a 10% discount on accessories, or buying through Verizon, I can get X number of gigs of data added to my plan over a period of time. So there become different ways where this is a high value piece to me as the consumer, maybe a lower value trade on the organization side. And now they get to a point where I'm actually buying that product rather than moving on and spending my money someplace else.
Yeah. And another thought that I'm trying to keep it top of mind because Mike had alluded to it, but I want to make sure that we cover this off, because getting to more of what is probably more of a traditional sort of situation that salespeople have to deal with is when you're going through a physical contract. And when you have a customer that has taken your subscription agreement or your product agreement and they've sent it to legal, or they've sent it to their, whoever reviews their contracts, and they've come back with a half a dozen red lines and they want to talk about specific terms and conditions inside of your contract, and then the struggles that a sales rep has to go through to then have that accepted or reviewed on their side. And then how do you facilitate those discussions about coming to agreement in a contract? And that's one of the things that can be that last mile that drives us all nuts. Is there'll be times when there are certain terms and conditions that both parties cannot come agreement to. But most of the time you can come to agreement if you understand the motivation behind the part of the contract that's being questioned. And what you really have to do is ask the question, and it's legalese, and you read it, and I don't have a law degree, and sometimes I read contracts and they just give me a headache. But you read through the legalese of a paragraph, and then the question I always ask is, if I have a question about it, or if they're questioning it, I'll ask them, tell me what the business concern is, or tell me what your concern is behind this paragraph, and let's talk about that, and let's see if we can arrive at language that satisfies your concern, not so much every little word inside of a legalese sort of paragraph. And I think if you can break it down where you could say, okay, well, what concerns you about that paragraph? And talk to me in regular terms about how this could impact you or not impact you. And I think that's one way to move those discussions forward. And a lot of times companies put terms and conditions in contracts that they know. When we were talking about trading earlier, they'll put 4 or 5 terms inside of a contract that they expect the average person, if it goes to a legal review or a paralegal even, they'll catch the 4 things that you've put in your contract that you kind of plant in there as automatic gives. So you show some flexibility. But the reality is they have no bearing on the actual negotiation. And sometimes people, I've seen this happen where they really didn't have any concerns with the contract itself or the language, but they have an internal legal team that's obligated to review all agreements. And their job is to review so many agreements in a month. And they demonstrate their value to the company by consistently redlining contracts. And then when you have the conversation, you find out, well, half the stuff they redlined really wasn't that important, or whatever the case might be. So again, it's trading, right?
One of the worst contract negotiations, or worst is probably a bad word, but it's the way that I describe it. Most memorable contract negotiations I went through was with a Bay Area company, high tech. The head legal person who was responsible for the contract had just received notice that she would no longer be with the company in 45 days. And this happened to be one of her last deals that she needed to get down. And she was going to get her pound of flesh out of this deal. And I think so Mike's laughing about it. And I don't think we got the deal. Yeah. And I don't think we got the deal done in that 45-day period, but we did get it done in about a 60-day period. And she was gone. And we made it through this barrier, this obstacle, which was this person. And then finally, when things were able to get unclogged, we could have a real business conversation with someone who is reasonable on the other side, who is also very interested in getting this thing implemented inside the organization. So I think another piece that's really important whenever going through a negotiation, whenever game planning for a negotiation is making sure you understand what the current reality is. What's important to the organization? Why is that important to the organization? What's their motivation? We talk about different levels. So you've got the legal side. The other part of the negotiation could just be procurement. So knowing that up front in the qualification process, whether or not where procurement fits in their buying process and being able to factor that into the discussion becomes really important, because that procurement person, their job, their primary role is to get a lower price than the one that you originally offered. And if their objective is to get somewhere, their spectrum of performance is based on getting the deal lowered 5 to 10%. If you know that and you can come in at 7% or 6% lower than what you originally had put out there, you can help move that process along much faster. So the thing that I look for in our sales team and our reps and the people that we're working with, and this is why I ask them these questions, but the thing that I look for is organization knowledge. What do we know about what's important to the customer to help inform us on how we should approach this negotiation? Because each negotiation is different, but the playbook that they work out of usually isn't very deep. It's rare that we run into a situation where that's the first time we heard something like that in the negotiation. Actually, I had one of those last year come up where someone basically, they took the approach of just kicking us in the teeth right out of the gate and said, we're not renewing. And so now all of a sudden you get a sales rep who's, we're losing a deal and it's damage control. How do we fix this? How do we fix this? How do we fix this? And the reality was we had enough data to show that there's more value in that organization renewing and keeping the program going forward. So be careful about how you react in those scenarios. That would be another piece. Now, we could talk about negotiation for hours.
I was just having flashbacks. You were talking about our favorite attorney that had short timers. I was thinking about international implications as well, in that different cultures negotiate differently. And this might be getting really in the weeds. But one of my worst negotiations I can remember, was mid-career, and I was actually in Taipei, and I was dealing with a semiconductor company. And what I tried to apply there was the same practice I use here in the US, which is I put the best value, the best contract, the best offer that we have. I put that on the table first, because I never want you to come back and say, I tried to take advantage of you in the beginning and then I gave myself false room to negotiate. And I learned a very valuable lesson that in Taiwan, with the semiconductor industry and the people I was dealing with, that there was an expectation that I had built probably 40 to 50% negotiating room in the quote that I'd given them initially, because the process I went through, I can't remember. I probably met with at least 3 different purchasing and contracting people at this semiconductor company. And basically, I thought I was getting to the end, and I kept explaining to everybody they sent in there that they just kept asking for discounts. I needed 10% discount. And I remember the last guy coming in, he said, I have to have a 10% discount. That's how I'm measured. That's how I'm valued. That's how I save face with my boss. And I have to have 10%. And there was negotiation. There was no negotiation. It was this, I have to leave this room with a 10% discount on here. And it was so incredibly frustrating. But I didn't take the time to understand the culture and the process and the things that I would encounter. I just was talking to my buyer, who basically threw me to the wind once I got to, like, when I was in the US negotiating with her, everything was great. And yep, all you had to do is come down, do some paperwork, and we'll be ready to go. Go down and meet her. She walks me down to procurement and contracting and all that. And, 4 days later, I'm still negotiating with these guys, checking with her like, hey, how's it going? Have you made it through, procurement yet? It was horrible. So I guess the learning point there was, if you have cultural differences or if you have nuances like that, just research that ahead of time and talk to people that have negotiated in those cultures if you can, to see what nuances you should be prepared for.
Yeah, and that brings up another story. I mean, one of my favorite approaches that I see inside organizations, and I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if there's some book on negotiation or negotiating for procurement professionals on this, or best approach to work with vendors or become a vendor whipper. But it's this idea of having a new person inside the organization on the customer side participate in the negotiation each year. So there are organizations that we've worked with where every year you deal with a new person on the procurement side. So you've got to go back through that process of helping them understand the value that you're delivering into an organization, helping them understand the impact that you've had on the organization. Many times this is just a tactic that they're using to help see what they can do to get that price point down another 5 points or down another couple of points.
Well, what I like about these answers you gave and the stories you shared is it reinforces what you've said almost every episode, that sales is a thinking process. Negotiation involves a lot of thinking to find out where your potential customer is at and what they value. And before we do wrap this episode, I have one question based on a couple of stories that you shared. Is negotiation different? Is your approach different if you're negotiating with a current customer versus a new customer?
I don't think it's different in that the things that Mike and I value and the things that we do when we negotiate, I don't think that changes in itself. I think that you have more information when you're dealing with a renewal or an existing customer, where you have data to be able to articulate the value that you're adding, versus a new relationship can be pretty speculative, where you haven't done business yet, you don't have a track record. And so you might have to make more of a estimated guess of what results could be. But the process itself, unless the customer really throws you for a loop, I mean, Mike gave you one example of where they change the buyer out every year, and that happens. But a lot of times, and this would kind of be my final thought. Otherwise, we could go all day about this. But my other thought would be that you'll get tested a lot. There are clients that just for sport, they have a rule of thumb that says every salesperson's good for 10%. And I think you have to really, if you understand the value that you're delivering and it's a price point that is generally acceptable to all the customers you do business with, I wouldn't say you have to draw a hard line and not be flexible and negotiate, but at the same time, have more confidence. Because one of the things that I think we're always trying to help our salespeople think about is not overreacting. And Mike touched on this a little bit, but there are people that will just want to try you on for size. If you're confident and you know what you deliver, you can have the confidence to sort of let that roll off your back, as opposed to going through a fire drill. And that does happen with existing customers, because the person that's responsible for retaining a customer relationship, obviously, it's critical to them to keep everybody on board. So, but it's having confidence. And
so what I think I heard there were 3 points on your 1 point. I think I heard trust. I think I heard gathering information, and I think I heard competence, as we kind of go through it. All of those are really important. And the primary difference is when we've got a relationship that's been built up over a period of time, we have access to more information. We have access to more data. There's this higher level of trust that's built between you and the organization. But the fundamental concepts, just like we talk about in sales in general, they are the fundamentals. They stay the same. Gather your information, start with the customer, minimize the number of assumptions, be clear on what your objectives are, and be clear on what your understanding is of their objectives. And that'll help you be more successful in each of these negotiations, whether it's with the customer, whether it's with your organization, whether it's with your family.
Well, I really enjoyed how this first listener question episode turned out. You guys did great. If we have a listener who wants to add a question to the show to hear you two answer it, how can they reach out to you?
The best way to contact us, you can contact us via Twitter. The information's in show notes. You can contact us via LinkedIn. That information's also in show notes. You can go to our Catalyst Sale website directly, and we even put our phone number out there.
We have a toll-free phone number now.
We do have a toll-free
which we
number.
Got our first phone call on the other day.
Yeah, who was that first phone
excited.
Call from?
It was a Better Business Bureau wanting to know if we want to sign up, but I would still say the fact that it worked and it actually came through on my phone, I was pleased.
So multiple ways to contact us. Really, the best way is to go to catalystsale.com, and you'll see more about what we're doing in the marketplace, who we're working with, and you can access recordings of this podcast as well.
All right. Thank you, Mike and Mike, and thank you for listening to Catalyst Sale.